Tell me about Guandong Corporation, your involvement in that, how it first came about.
Well, the first I heard of it was when Jeff came around and asked if I'd heard about this Chinese company that was floating and what I knew about it. And I knew nothing about it whatsoever, so I just simply said, I don't know. And then next thing I knew, I was in his office with Alistair Drysdale, and he again said, what am I getting, chatting about what he was going to invest in, and he again said, I want to get into this Chinese company. I think it's going to be a good investment. It's going to go well. Apparently, the shares are hard to get, and all the signs were. He was saying that it was going to be a good thing to get into. So he then rang Bruce Matheson, who he said he would ring Bruce Matheson, who was someone who I'd never heard of. As it turns out, Bruce was the chairman of Sino Securities, which was the firm doing the float. So he rang Bruce Matheson. I think it was at his South Yarra office. And the secretary said, sorry, Bruce isn't here, but you can get him on his mobile out at the Shopping Town Hotel in Doncaster, which Bruce owned and which was getting pokies put in. So Jeff rang him on the speakerphone at Doncaster and got him out there, and Drysdale and I both were in the room listening, and they had a conversation. And I think it started off along the lines of, Bruce, how are you? What are you doing? And I think Bruce then just raised the issue of what was going to happen with poker machines in Victoria with the casino coming into being. Because I think about 2 weeks earlier they'd given the casino licence, and the government was in the middle of a series of decisions on expanding the number of poker machines outside the casino and working out the rules as to how far and how many poker machines you could have in and around the casino. And Bruce asked him something about what the situation was going to be with his poker machines in relation to the casino. And Jeff didn't take it that seriously, but he just flippantly said something along the lines of, well, if you're more than 20 k's away from the casino, you'll be right, along the lines. But there was no insight into government policy, but clearly Bruce was wanting to find out what the new rules were going to be, and that was what Jeff said. I'm not even sure that was the final rule that we've got today, but certainly there was a question and there was an answer about poker machine rules. And Bruce was, as I subsequently found out, the biggest poker machine player in Victoria, who, over the years has controlled, more than 3,000 machines in 20 to 30 odd pubs around Melbourne, and he's made millions of dollars out of it. Now, the conversation then went on to Guandong. How can I get some shares? And Bruce said, look, don't speak to me, speak to Richard Lee, who's the Managing Director of Sino Securities. Now, Bruce, as I discovered later, was the chairman of Sino Securities and the controlling shareholder in Sino. And Sino was doing the float. They were the underwriter, they were the promoter. They brought this stock, Guandong, out from China. So I think Bruce gave us Sino's number, and then that was the end of that. So the Premier then rang...
Steve, let me just interrupt you at that point. How was Mr Kennett's manner with Bruce Matheson?
Oh, familiar. I mean, clearly they knew each other, and he knew where to get him in the office. He didn't have his mobile straight away, but obviously they knew each other, and they were quite friendly. Bruce, it's Jeff Kennett here. How are you? G'day, Jeff. How are you? And they knew each other quite well, and they were quite chatty, but it wasn't sort of we'll catch up for a drink next week, mate, how's your wife, that sort of stuff. It wasn't that familiar, but clearly they, on first names basis, they knew each other. I mean, Bruce is well known to have been a Liberal Party donor, and he's sort of a reasonably prominent businessman around town, so it's not unusual that Jeff would know him and did know him.
And so the Premier and Bruce Matheson discussed Mr Matheson's poker machine business in the same conversation as they discussed Mr Kennett's share investment.
Yeah, it was only a one-line question and answer. Bruce asked the question, what's happening with the poker machines in light of the casino, and Jeff gave him an answer, you'll be right, mate, if you're more than 20 k's, I think it was, away from the casino. So it wasn't a detailed discussion, there were no undertakings given, but certainly Bruce made the inquiry. And Jeff gave the answer. And then the conversation moved on to how the Premier could get some shares in Guandong.
Okay. So now go on and tell me about the phone call to Richard Lee.
Okay, now I subsequently discovered later that Richard Lee and Bruce Matheson had been in to see the Premier about 2 weeks before this to introduce Guandong and sort of promote it and this sort of stuff. Now this is obviously how Jeff knew about it, but he only made a last-minute decision to invest. This was sort of 2 weeks later. I think it was around September 17, 18, 19, around that time. And so he spoke to Bruce, and he then rang Richard Lee, and Richard Lee was just ecstatic and excited that the Premier had called him, and he was clearly in awe of the fact that he was taking this call. And the conversation went along the lines of how's the Guandong float going, and Richard Lee said, oh, it's going very well, and the Premier asked what price the shares were. And I'll never forget Richard Lee on the speakerphone, as if to say he was doing the Premier a favour, said, oh, for you, Mr. Premier, 78 cents, as if that was some sort of discount. Now, clearly it wasn't, and we all had a laugh later on that this Chinese stockbroker was, somehow implying he would be able to give the Premier a discount on his shares, which we knew wasn't true. But the Premier then went along to ask and say, well, can I get 100,000? And as I discovered later, the float was already massively oversubscribed, as the stock exchange had been told. And it was still officially open, but no one from the public trying to get shares could get any at that point. And Richard Lee said, no, how about 20,000? And the Premier said, okay, fine, I'll settle for 20,000. And so that was the end of that conversation.